people can feel free to move or just continue to meditate and shift position if you need. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namassāmi. So, in this morning's interview session, someone was recounting a story about a coworker of theirs who was drunk and jumped on a glass bottle with bare feet. And when they subsequently passed out, and there's a paramedic nearby who stepped in to help bandage the foot, they found themselves in this strange disembodied state, looking down calmly at the whole scene. And they saw the paramedic bandaging the foot, and they saw their own body lying prone, drunk, and apparently had this insight about the coarseness and unsavoriness of their behavior, just how irresponsible they were being. And then when they came back into their body, recovered, their whole life changed based on that one clear insight and the disjunct between the calm clarity from which they suddenly were able to look and the scene which they saw, which they were part of. And whether or not this, you consider their chitta, their mind or heart actually rose above their body and looked down, or if it was simply a perception, the point that I think is really useful to take away is that with a degree of calm and separation from ourselves, or from the patterns we usually take as ourselves, we can see in ways that are clear and deeply affecting, and which lead to a certain letting go and ability to move on. So this is the essence of the next quality in the Pamoja cascade in transcendent dependent origination. Yathabhutam jnanadasanam, knowledge and vision of things as they are, or knowledge and visions of things as they have come to be, a clarity of seeing. And so, just as a refresher, the doorway into this sequence, the master narrative of Buddhist meditation, can be one of five. You can enter a sense of well-being of Pamoja through giving, through morality, through learning, through wisdom, and other means. And yet once you've entered, once you've touched that sense of well-being through any of those doorways, of which today's learning, faith as well is one more doorway. Out of that central room Ajahn Kovilo talked about, which is plastered with pictures of ourselves. I really like that part. Once you've entered that garden, the well-being, if properly channeled, leads to this sequence where Pamoja leads to, which is well-being, leads to piti, which is joy or rapture, leads to passaddhi, tranquility of body and mind, or sukha first, pleasure, and then passaddhi, tranquility of body and mind, samadhi, unification of mind or concentration, and then concentration, the still mind. That's where we left off yesterday, and that leads to this quality of clear seeing, knowledge and vision of things as they have come to be. and that leads to dispassion and liberation and dispassion, disenchantment, dispassion, liberation. But we can get to that later. The point being that the calm mind leads to clear seeing. And this is a deeply important principle in meditation practice, is generally we live our lives moving constantly. The mind is constantly hungry, so it's flitting after this and that. And it's a bit like trying to look out the window of a moving train and trying to spot the shapes in the distance. They're blurry. But when the train stops, suddenly you can look out the window and you can see clearly, oh, those are some buildings, that's a person walking, there's a tree. Another analogy is of surgery. When, before someone can undergo surgery, they need to have some sort of anesthesia injected. And when the body's completely still, then the surgeon can carefully, look into what is in the body. Is there a tumor here? What's wrong? And similarly, the mind, when it's still, suddenly there can really be this sense of seeing clearly these patterns, these things that we usually are so caught in that we can't see clearly. The body becomes strong through movement. The mind becomes strong through stillness. Another analogy I think is helpful is of a bottle of water and salt or color shaken up. And when you just let it sit for a time, the silt or the color or the dust lands, it just settles out, the snow globe, like Ajahn Kobilo was saying, and suddenly you can see clearly what's inside. And the other important thing is that it's not just stillness, but a bright, happy stillness. You'll remember that on that Pamoja cascade, that well-being cascade, that the first states one touches are bright ones, and those lead to calm. And when we are constantly feeding off of the world, when we're looking for happiness in these transitory things around us that are shifting, and that deep in our hearts we know are unreliable, because we're so starving, because we're trying to find sustenance in them, our mind subconsciously knows that it can't afford to see them clearly. It can't afford to see the fact that we're surrounded by a vortex of change. But when it's happy, when it's cultivated this internal sense of well-being, of pamoja, and of stillness, then, because it's happy in and of itself, it can afford to see these patterns and these objects as just what they are, just as they've come to be, as not mine, not myself. And anicca, anatta, dukkha, as suffering, not self, and impermanent. And it can see clearly. So the bright, still mind is a prerequisite. And much of the techniques or the approaches to meditation are about cultivating the still mind, about calming things down, using or channeling the energy such that they settle over time. But there does come an important place in practice, and usually this will reoccur throughout one's meditation sit or day and practice as a whole. It's not like you always have to cultivate the completely still mind and then you get to look to see things clearly. But rather, to be able, in meditation, to step back and see how things are with a degree of clarity. And before moving on to that quickly, the Buddha spoke about the mind as these bowls of water, ruffled. The various hindrances to calm affect each bowl of water in different ways. So sensual desire is like a bowl of water filled with dye and color. A bowl of anger is like the mind that's angry is like a bowl of water heated over a flame until it's bubbling and boiling, and so on. And so with each of these bowls of water, the sutta says, one cannot see clearly their own reflection. Similarly, when the mind is agitated by sensual desire or anger or sloth and drowsiness, which is compared to algae on the top of the water, or restlessness, which is water ruffled by wind, or doubt, which is water muddied in a dark place. When one's mind is affected by any of those hindrances, then one cannot see things as they truly are. And even texts and sacred texts, holy words, which one long has known, are not clear to one. But when the mind is free of all those hindrances, it's compared to a still bowl of water placed in a bright place, limpid, and one can see clearly one's own face, one can see clearly things as they are, and even holy words that one has only just learned appear clear to one. This is the clarity of vision that comes from stillness. So we've been talking about a huge amount of polywords, throwing them around. Today's theme on the doorway to these states of well-being was study, and it can seem like a lot. But what's useful to understand is many of these frameworks the Buddha gave are just lens through which we can perceive our experience to see it clearly. And he gave some very concrete lens, but it's important not to get fixated on the lens. That's like being given a pair of new eyeglasses and just becoming really, really interested in sort of fumbling with them and playing around with them instead of just putting them on and looking at the world. So often if you found one way of looking at your experience that really feels poignant and potent and meaningful right now. I know someone on this retreat is just, right now, the three characteristics, suffering, not self, changeability, and permanence. Those three, just seeing that in their experience is really meaningful right now. And if those eyeglasses, because that's a framework to see the experience, if those lenses are working, there's no need to try on a bunch of Ray-Bans and different types of glasses. Just keep those on and look at what is revealing itself to you. But there's some very key frameworks the Buddha gave for this study, this learning, this sutta, which are the lenses. Some very good, easy, approachable lenses through which you can look at experience when the mind is calm. So the one that many of you might know the most is, of course, the Four Noble Truths. Can you look at a moment of experience and see, is this suffering? Where's the suffering here? Where's the stress? Often, for example, with a state of boredom, you might not really realize that there's a subtle aversion hidden in it. Or with sometimes, say, craving arises. You find yourself thinking about what you're going to do after the retreat, the people you're going to talk to, the movie you might see, the pizza you might have. And if you look at that through the lens of the Four Noble Truths, it's easy to see the suffering. You can see the burning, and just labeling it, this is dukkha. It doesn't have to be this big battle of trying to pull your mind back from this, or looking at the undesirability of pizza deep down, or how it only lasts so long, although you can. But just put a nice topping of dukkha on top of the pizza, and just label it, this is suffering. And often that's enough to let you let go. That lens is simple and powerful. Or to look at the craving that undergirds that suffering. When you come to moments of peace, even slight calm in meditation, or the release on the other side of one of these patterns, say you see that angry argument that's welled up in you and you've sat through and it's faded, and you haven't sort of engaged with it, but you notice on the other end of that, things are okay. Good, real problems in life rarely get solved, they just dissolve. So can you notice how on the other side of all that suffering, there's just a sense of it's okay. There's a sense of charity for the person of spaciousness. That's the third noble truth. And really marking that, noticing that, that's cooling, that's peace, that's release. And then the fourth noble truth of the path. Can you notice When are you cultivating these states? Where are you able to kind of put forth a little more effort and cultivate brightness? And can you rejoice in that? Another useful lens framework is the three characteristics, or the three perceptions, which many of you might know. So, impermanence, seeing how things are constantly arising and falling. Suffering, or dukkha, so seeing the stress in them. And not self, seeing how you can't control them. And this is so easy to see in experience. We can't predict what we're going to think in the next 2 seconds, and yet somehow we think we're in control. Somehow we think that we take it as a self, which is just an absurd proposition. You really don't know what's going to come into your mind in the next 2 seconds. It's not that we can't put forth conditions to affect that over time in wholesome ways, but there's real benefit in seeing this is not under my control. My body and its stomach gurgling, the pain, it's just not me. That's an unbelievably powerful framework towards letting go. Another framework the Buddha recommends is called the fivefold knowing, which is you see the attraction in a state. You see why it's enticing, the payoff. You see the drawback, the adinava in Pali. You see the escape from that whole quality or cycle. And then you see how it arises and how it passes. Although you don't always have to add on those two. Sometimes there's just the three: the attraction, the drawback, and the escape. So it's really useful to apply that lens to experience, to see clearly what's going on. When a hindrance arises of anger, of sensual desire, what feels good about that? What's the real attraction there? For example, with anger, it's easy to notice the pain, the burning, but we wouldn't do it unless we were getting some sort of payoff from it. What's attractive about bringing up the argument again? And what you might really find is there's this sense of self that's very solid. You're very oriented. It's no question where you are and how dare they, and that's comforting. It's a habit. Same with self-recrimination. The sense of self is a powerful seduction. It's a powerful attraction. And until you've seen why you keep bringing these hindrances up, these same old patterns, then they will continue to come up. Or seeing the drawback. Say with sensual desire, which going off into a fantasy about this or that, or an addiction or a movie, it can be fairly pleasant in a way, but you can notice the drawback. What happens after the fact? What happens with the letdown, with the sense, oh, I just wasted 5 or 10 minutes? How does it make the body feel? Someone was speaking today about this sense of blame arising in them, and how mentally it was quite exciting, but they noticed that in their body there was this sense of exhaustion that came with it. And just really seeing that for the first time, that's the adinava, the drawback. And then the escape, which is when you compare the advantage to the drawback, or the enticement to the drawback, usually there's a sense of just letting go, of being able to let go. So it's really useful to apply those to the difficult things in our experience. And the one final framework I think that's worth bringing up is many people know about dependent origination, and it's a huge, complex system we don't have the chance to get into, but there's a certain set of links in it, which it's really useful to put on that lens when we look at our experience to see clearly. This word, knowledge and visions of things as they have come to be, as they are, actually means as they have arisen, yatabhutam. Or it can mean that. And so that key link in our experience between feeling and contact, so the sense impression, and craving and becoming, and the birth of a self out of that. Someone was talking this morning just about the experience of the heater, which is, I guess, a focal point of this retreat. And how these previous years, she's always just borne with it, endured through it, I'll deal with it, it's okay. And this is the first time she really let herself investigate what was going on. And what she noticed was, yes, there was a sense of annoyance, but then that really quickly moved into this sense of first blame and trying to find someone who was responsible. And then when she looked even closer, she saw that that outward movement of blame was actually catalyzed by a sense of guilt that she wasn't good enough of a meditator for it not to affect her. And because that was difficult, she had to go out. And just, you'll notice in some of the suttas, there's one called the Honeyball Sutta, and it talks about with the sort of internal and external sense and consciousness, there is contact. When there's contact, there's feeling. When there's feeling, there is, what one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, what one proliferates on. And then those categories of proliferation come back and assail one. And what's so interesting there, it's a really fascinating progression in general, and I think we all have the experience of having the little mental fantasies we create turn back on us and attack us. But that the first person pronoun appears at perception. So until then it's with contact, there is feeling, it's impersonal, but then what one feels, one perceives. And noticing that moment between feeling, just the pure sense of that's an annoying heater, and then the birth, the becoming, the craving, the blame, and really noticing that juncture. That's a clear moment of seeing. That's clearly seeing how things come to be, conditionality. And you can also see how things have come to be in the past in you. Many of our deepest patterns they were survival mechanisms from when we were young that have stuck around since. So when there's one of those difficult patterns that come up, can you see, this is how I was when I was a kid, and it's what helped me survive? And instead of berating ourselves for it, can you see this is how it was conditioned? And you can even then invite that kid in, hand them a warm drink, say thank you for what you did, you helped me survive as a young person or in a previous portion of my life. I don't think I need you in the same way I did, it's okay. And that's seeing things as they've come to be. Likewise with people around us, the anger, can you investigate and see what's made them like they are? Because if we really knew everyone's history, we would never be able to be angry at them. We all have that experience of seeing the conditions that brought someone into being, where the person who you're just exasperated by, you suddenly learn, that's what their childhood was like, or that's what's happening at home, that's the illness they're going through, that's what's happening at work. And suddenly there's that, okay, I get it. And the anger just dissolves because you understand how things came to be. So much of the mind's chewing over things is because it doesn't understand how something happened, but there's always a reason. This is how things are conditioned. There's a sutta where, alongside that links that system of conditionality, the Buddha lays out these other qualities of Dhamma that sort of are counterpoints to the three characteristics, somehow, maybe. He says, whether or not a Tathagata arises in the world, there is this, the inerrancy of Dhamma, the thusness of Dhamma, the not otherwiseness of Dhamma. Tatata, avitatata, ananyatata. And the sense that when you see how things are conditioned, when you see, that's how this came into being, or when you see clearly, this is the drawback, this is what is hurting me in this pattern, or this is the draw, this is why I keep going back to this fantasy. There's a sense of relief and thusness, a settledness. When the Buddha says there's this thusness, it sounds like he's almost trying to articulate something that is inarticulatable. The word is ta. It's like onomatopoeic, grounded, settled. It's like this. It's solid. And you can tell when you really see something clearly, you come back to solid ground. There's no more of this wavering and chewing and running. It's just, oh, it's like this. And that's our ground. That's seeing clearly. And what you might notice is that becomes more accessible. When the mind becomes calm, this one practitioner yesterday who was talking about seeing the three characteristics for a time, and then those would dissolve into just this sense of kind of grounded knowing itself. There is this interplay where you see the objects and you let go, and suddenly there the ground is again, or a ground, a solidity, a spaciousness. And when the mind becomes calm, that spaciousness becomes more and more, that bright spaciousness becomes more and more accessible. And it's true that only the Tathagata can touch, or only Arhants touch true thusness, free of all defilement and ignorance. But we can get tastes of that settledness. And even if the mind isn't settled, that phrase, oh, it's like this. It's like this. This is how it is right now. You can touch it there. That's the shortcut. That's always accessible. And you touch it at the tail end of every kind of pattern of craving. When it fades, there is usually a moment of, oh, and touching ground again. So this is the clear seeing, is we do cultivate calm. And from the calm mind, when you've been meditating for a while and things are feeling settled enough, and maybe the mind doesn't really want to go back to its meditation object, then you can contemplate things in your life, your body, relationships, difficult patterns. You can look at them through all of these lenses. What is conditioning this pattern? What's its draw, etc. You can look at your life through a calm mind and see what you see. If there's a difficult pattern that comes up in your meditation again and again, one of the hindrances, why? Why is it coming up? And when the mind's calm, you can kind of look at it clearly and see, oh, that's why I keep going to anger. That's the draw, or that's the conditioning of it. Or you can just see it as not self, impermanent. If there's a sort of line of phrase like, how dare that person, then you can just attach a little Dharma phrase at the end, and that's anicca. If there's like a repetitive thing, like, I would love to have, I hope they have dessert tomorrow, and that's anicca. Just keep attaching that. That's impermanent. And this just applies the reflection to everything. And you find that you get real clarity on these patterns. And the patterns that you see clearly in your meditation are almost always deeply related, if not the same patterns, that are dominating your life as a whole. So what you see on the cushion is often that vision, that insight will carry right out into your life and affect it in a deep way. So, cultivate the calm mind that's happy, and then be willing to apply that power and that strength in the mind to look through these frameworks at your experience and try to see them clearly. And trust that when the difficult things and the distractions come into meditation, they're not necessarily bothers. They're not necessarily out of place. It's a chance for you to see the patterns that are dominating your life with a clarity. And in that sense, it's a gift. You actually have a chance to sit down with them and gain true insight. So, good luck. So I think we have 3 45-minute sessions now. Yes, okay. So And the first section, as usual, will be group interviews for some in the interview committee. So they may go, and others may walk or sit as you like.